AI knew I was pregnant before I did. At first, it was weird. Then it got scary. I've always been a data-driven person. I love tracking my steps, monitoring my sleep patterns, and logging my meals. It gives me a sense of control over my health, like I'm actively making better choices every day. That's why, for the past few years, I've been using a fitness app that syncs with my smartwatch. It collects everything: heart rate, movement, sleep cycles, even my stress levels. At this point, it knows more about my body than I do. Or at least, that's what I used to joke. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed something odd. My app started adjusting my daily recommendations in ways that didn't make sense. It suggested I increase my calorie intake, even though I hadn't changed my workout routine. It told me to get more sleep, even though my sleep cycle hadn't been any different from usual. Then, it flagged my morning heart rate as slightly elevated compared to my baseline. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a seasonal change or just an update to the app's algorithm. No big deal. But then, things got even weirder. One day, as I was scrolling through the app's recommended articles section, I saw an article about early pregnancy symptoms. I had never searched for anything remotely related to pregnancy, nor had I clicked on any related content before. I found it odd, but figured it was just a random suggestion. Maybe a coincidence. The next day, there was another one, and another. Signs you might be pregnant without knowing. Why you're more tired than usual. The link between heart rate and early pregnancy. I laughed, rolling my eyes. It was absurd. I wasn't pregnant. There was no way. Still, the notifications continued. The app started warning me to avoid overexertion in my workouts, something it had never done before. It adjusted my recommended daily macros, subtly increasing my carb intake. Then, the strangest thing happened. I received an actual notification that made me freeze in my tracks. Your data suggests early pregnancy. Consider taking a test. I stared at my phone screen, my heart pounding. What the hell? I hadn't even missed a period yet. I hadn't noticed any changes in my body. I felt completely normal. And yet, here was my fitness app, basically diagnosing me before I even suspected a thing. I took a deep breath. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was some kind of glitch. Or maybe they had rolled out a new feature that was getting a little too aggressive with its predictions. But then, the paranoia started creeping in. What if it wasn't wrong? The thought was ridiculous, but I couldn't shake it. Just to prove the AI wrong, I went out that afternoon and bought a pregnancy test. I didn't even think twice about it. I was so sure it would be negative that I didn't bother stressing. I got home, took the test, waited a few minutes, and glanced down at the stick. 2 lines. Positive. I felt the air leave my lungs. My legs gave out, and I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the test. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. My hands were shaking. I checked the box to make sure I had read the instructions correctly. Then I took another test. Same result. I was pregnant. And somehow my fitness app had figured it out before I even suspected a thing. At first, I was in shock. I hadn't been actively trying to conceive, though my boyfriend and I had been a little careless once or twice. But how on earth could AI predict something so personal before I even felt any different? I started spiraling, trying to figure out what data it had used to reach that conclusion. Had it been tracking my basal body temperature? Some women monitor their temperature to detect ovulation or early pregnancy, and my smartwatch does record subtle changes. Or was it my resting heart rate? I had read somewhere that a slightly elevated heart rate can be an early sign of pregnancy, but I had never considered that an app would pick up on that. Maybe it had noticed subtle changes in my sleep patterns. Maybe I had been moving less, or waking up more frequently without realizing it. Then it hit me. My period tracking. I wasn't late yet. But what if the app had noticed a shift in my cycle pattern? Even without a missed period, maybe it had detected small variations in timing, symptoms, or body temperature trends. The more I thought about it, the creepier it became. My phone had essentially diagnosed my pregnancy before I even felt pregnant. And if it knew, Who else did? I started getting paranoid. What if this information was being sold or shared? I had heard stories about women suddenly being bombarded with baby product ads before even announcing their pregnancies. What if my app had already flagged me as a pregnant user in some database? Later that night, my boyfriend came over. I hadn't told him yet. I was still processing everything myself. But as we sat on the couch, he pulled out his phone and frowned. "That's weird," he said. "I just got an ad for baby cribs. Why would I get that?" My blood ran cold. I hadn't searched for anything. I hadn't said anything. And yet, somehow the algorithm had connected the dots between us. I stared at him, my heart racing, realizing that this wasn't just about AI making a lucky guess. It was watching us. It was piecing things together in ways I didn't even understand. And if it could do this, what else did it already know? I was spiraling. I needed to know how the AI had figured this out before me. I spent the next few days digging into articles, research papers, and forums. It turns out AI analyzes everything: my sleep patterns, temperature changes, shopping habits, and even micro expressions from my phone's front camera. Had I really given up that much privacy without realizing it? The scariest part? I still hadn't told anyone, yet baby product ads were suddenly everywhere. My phone, my laptop, even my smart speaker. It wasn't just a coincidence. The data knew. And if the algorithm had pieced this together so quickly, who else had access to my secret before I did? At first, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the ads were just some bizarre coincidence. Maybe I'd subconsciously done something, hovered too long on a baby-related post, or mentioned something in passing. But deep down, I knew better. I started testing things. I cleared my search history, disabled ad tracking, and even turned off my microphone permissions for social media apps. But it didn't stop. The ads kept coming. Diapers, prenatal vitamins, nursery furniture, even baby names. Baby names. Then I checked my email. My inbox was suddenly filled with exclusive pregnancy deals and top-rated maternity must-haves. I hadn't signed up for anything. I hadn't even told my doctor yet. Something was seriously wrong. I went into full research mode. I combed through every privacy setting I could find, disabled personalized ads, and even tried using my boyfriend's laptop instead of mine. The moment I logged into my email, the ads followed me. The tracking wasn't just on my phone, it was tied to me. It got worse. One evening, I was talking to my boyfriend about how weird everything had been. I told him how my fitness app had figured it out before I did, how the ads wouldn't stop, how it felt like my entire digital footprint had been rewritten overnight. He was skeptical at first, but then it happened. His phone buzzed, a notification. He frowned and opened it. "That's weird," he muttered. "I just got a push notification for a new Dad Essentials checklist." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never searched for anything like that," he said, staring at his screen. "I mean, I don't even... Wait, how would they even know?" My hands were shaking. I grabbed my own phone and opened my fitness app. Had I somehow connected our data? Was there something linking us? But then I realized it didn't need a direct link. It had already connected the dots. I remembered an article I'd read about AI-driven advertising. It wasn't just based on your personal searches anymore. It was based on proximity, shared locations, even mutual connections. If you spent enough time around someone, the algorithm would start treating you as a linked entity, which meant it had already decided that he was the father. I felt sick. It wasn't just watching me. It was making assumptions about my relationships, my future, my entire life. And the scariest part? It wasn't wrong. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, replaying every tiny detail. How much did my phone know? How much had I given away without even realizing it? I thought about every time I'd allowed an app to track my location, every time I'd granted a vague permission without reading the fine print. And then I thought about who else had access to this data. I knew companies like Google, Meta, and Amazon collected insane amounts of personal information, but I had always assumed it was mostly for ad targeting. Annoying? Yes. Invasive? Definitely. But this felt like something more. It felt like a violation. If an AI could detect something as personal as pregnancy before I even knew, what else was it capable of? Could it predict a breakup before it happened? Could it anticipate health conditions before a doctor diagnosed them? Could it manipulate my choices before I even made them? And the worst question of all, was this even my data anymore? Or had I lost control of it completely? I started thinking about the implications. Could my employer somehow access this? My insurance company? What if, in some database somewhere, I was already flagged as expecting, affecting future policies, job opportunities, or financial decisions? I tried to push the thoughts away, but I couldn't. Because this wasn't just about pregnancy. It was about how much of ourselves we'd already handed over to algorithms without questioning it. The next morning, I made a decision. I deleted my fitness app. I turned off every tracking permission I could find. I factory reset my phone and considered getting a new number altogether, but it was too late. The data was already out there. I could erase my apps, change my settings, even throw my phone in the ocean. But that wouldn't change the fact that somewhere in some AI-driven system, I was already categorized. A pregnancy prediction model had flagged me, and that information wasn't just going to disappear. The moment my data was collected, I had lost control over it. And that realization was far more terrifying than the pregnancy test itself. To this day, I don't know exactly which piece of data tipped off the AI first. Maybe it was my resting heart rate. Maybe it was my temperature. Maybe it was something even more subtle. Something I hadn't even thought to track. But I do know one thing for certain. AI knew before I did. And that means it knows more about me than I ever will. I thought I had done everything possible to cut off the AI's reach. I wiped my phone, deleted my accounts, and even started using a VPN. But a few days later, my boyfriend sent me a text that made my stomach drop. "Babe, is there something you need to tell me?" I stared at the message, my pulse spiking. Then, a second text followed. "I've been getting ads for cribs and parenting books all day." I hadn't searched for baby items. I hadn't spoken the words out loud. I hadn't even typed anything remotely related to pregnancy on my phone since I found out. So how did the algorithm know to target him? It wasn't just tracking me anymore. It was tracking us. I called him immediately. "You're sure you never searched for anything?" "Positive," he said. I didn't even think about it until the fifth ad popped up. And then I remembered what you told me the other day, about the AI knowing before you did. I felt sick. It was one thing for AI to predict my pregnancy based on personal health data. It was invasive, but at least I could rationalize it. But this meant the algorithm wasn't just using my data. It was pulling from my surroundings, my relationships, my proximity to another person. How long had it been tracking him, too? What else had it connected? I started digging again. More articles, more research, more rabbit holes. What I found was worse than I expected. AI-powered advertising didn't just rely on your actions anymore. It cross-referenced data between people in your social circles. If you lived with someone, spent time around them, or even shared a Wi-Fi connection, the system would start assuming shared interests and life events. That meant it had figured out we were together. It had connected our devices, tracked our locations, and concluded that if I was pregnant, he must be the father. And it was feeding him ads accordingly. I sat there, staring at my screen, feeling like I had completely lost control of my own reality. It wasn't just my health data that had betrayed me. It was everything. My habits, my relationships, my unspoken thoughts. I had been careful. I had told no one. And yet, something, already knew. I needed to know just how deep this went. I went back through my phone settings, checking every permission I had ever granted. There were apps I hadn't opened in months that still had access to my location, my microphone, my contacts. My smart speaker log showed data entries I didn't recognize, recordings of me walking around my apartment, background noises, fragmented sentences. I was being watched. Not by a person, not by a government agency, but by an invisible network of algorithms constantly listening, analyzing, predicting. And then I asked myself the scariest question yet. If AI knew I was pregnant before I did, who else knew now? I thought back to all the stories I had heard but brushed off. Women receiving pregnancy-related ads before taking a test. Health insurance companies adjusting policies based on search histories. Employers making hiring decisions based on invisible data points. Could my insurance company see this? Could they quietly adjust my rates, expecting increased medical costs? What about my job? What if my employer had access to third-party data that flagged me as expecting before I even announced it? Was I already on some list I had no control over? I decided to test something. I borrowed a friend's phone, one I had never logged into, never connected to my accounts. I searched for neutral topics, vacation spots, cooking recipes, book recommendations, nothing baby-related. Then I waited. Within hours, baby ads started appearing. Not on my friend's phone, on mine. It had already linked me back. It didn't matter what I deleted, what I cleared, what I blocked. The AI had already built a profile of me. My data wasn't just something I could erase. It existed in too many places, tied together by invisible connections I would never fully understand. I wasn't paranoid. I was already exposed. That night, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. I wasn't sure what to do anymore. Even if I went completely offline, the damage was already done. The moment AI detected something about me, it was out of my hands. It had made assumptions about my life, my future, my relationships. And those assumptions were shaping the digital world around me in ways I couldn't stop. And the scariest part? I had never given explicit permission for any of this. Not really. I had agreed to vague terms of service. I had accepted tracking for a better experience. I had enabled health monitoring because it seemed useful. But at no point had I ever said, yes, I want an AI to know I'm pregnant before I do. I want it to tell my boyfriend. I want it to predict my life before I even live it. And yet, here I was. The next morning, I made one final attempt to fight back. I disconnected everything I could. I replaced my fitness tracker with a basic analog watch. I stopped using voice assistants. I even bought an old-school flip phone, just to see if I could break free from the network of surveillance I had unknowingly built around myself. For a while, it seemed to work. The ads slowed down. The targeted suggestions became less specific. I started to feel like I had regained some semblance of privacy. But then, weeks later, something chilling happened. I walked into a baby store. Not to buy anything, just to look. I paid in cash. I didn't take out my phone. I didn't scan anything. The next day, the baby ads were back. And that's when I realized there was no escaping this. I still don't know exactly how it happened. Maybe it was security cameras using facial recognition. Maybe it was geolocation tracking. Maybe it was something I hadn't even thought of yet. But what I do know is this. Privacy, as I once understood it, no longer exists. AI doesn't just predict. It doesn't just analyze. It watches. It listens. It connects. And sometimes, it knows your future before you do. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more unbelievable real-life stories.